So, hi, I'm Megan, and it's becoming a bit of a running joke here that I never ever remember to turn the mic on when I start live streaming. Never. Like, I've done this upwards of 15 times now, and I always forget to turn the mic on. So, hi. Let's try that one again, shall we? So I said beforehand that my teeth are super see-through if I smile too broadly, which is really disconcerting. Really disconcerting. So I'll try and... I don't think I have the time to fiddle with that right now, but I'll just not smile so widely at the moment, and it will be less weird than if you can see through my teeth. So hi everybody, apologies for the microphone issues. My name is Megan. I'm one half of Digital Hammurabi. If you're new here, you've probably seen my husband Josh, Dr. Josh, on someone else's channel. He goes on Skylar Fiction, and he's been on Aaron Ra a couple of times, and then on SEC he talks about Hebrew Bible and history and Sumerian, and the historical background to the biblical text. I have not yet got my PhD. I should say this especially at the outset of this particular stream. I have been in education for a hell of a long time. I think I've had 1 year outside of school since I was 5, which is quite scary when you think about it, because I'm now 32. I spent 1 year au pairing in DC when I was 22 maybe. So this stream is about credibility and authority and who gets to be called an expert. And I'm specifically talking about academia here, because I recently did a video about ancient aliens and pointing out the poor ways in which they use archaeological evidence and also actual archaeologists. And one of the criticisms that I leveled at the episode was that out of the 8 or so experts they had on to be interviewed, it was about the site of Göbekli Tepe, but out of the 8 or so experts they had on, only 4 of them had PhDs. And of those 4 PhDs, only 2 of them actually studied the fields in which they were speaking of. One was an archaeologist and one was a doctor of Mayan studies, I think. And the Mayan studies guy was actually talking about South American history. And the archaeologist was talking about archaeology, prehistoric archaeology, which was his field of expertise. And all of the other experts were ancient alien theorists. I say all of the other experts, that's not true. There were 2 other PhDs. One was a psychology PhD and one was a geologist. And the geologist was talking about astronomy and the psychologist was talking about mythological texts. So I was criticizing the show because they had very minimal numbers of actual experts, and minimal numbers of actual experts talking about the fields that they actually worked in. One of the things I should say quite early on is that just because you have a PhD doesn't make you credible. For example, Josh has a PhD in Assyriology. Just because he is a doctor doesn't mean that you should listen to him if he tells you anything about chemistry or biology or, I don't know, cooking. Because he has a PhD, but he doesn't have a PhD in biology or chemistry or cuisine. He has a PhD in Assyriology. So one of the things that was particularly wrong with the Ancient Aliens episode was that 2 of the PhDs they had on were talking about things that they had no actual formal training in. So I got not a lot of pushback, but some pushback about this criticism about my insistence that you need a PhD in order to speak on these kinds of subjects, in order to be called in as an expert witness for a TV show. And I think that criticism was I think the pushback was correct. I did overstate the case somewhat, because you can obviously have expertise in a field without having actually any qualifications in it. So I went on Twitter and I asked various people, what do you think about this? So my original tweet collection was here. So my recent Ancient Aliens critique has received a couple of negative comments regarding my insistence that if you're going to present yourself as an expert on a particular topic, you should have an advanced degree in that field. I'll happily modify my position somewhat and say that professional experience, and I mean actual professional experience, as opposed to conducting pseudo-archaeology tours around the Giza Plateau and then saying you're an expert, is also an excellent basis for claiming expertise. I would like to hear other people's thoughts though. I don't wish to minimise research done by non-professionals, but I do still think that there is immense value in professional training, be it in the classroom, dig site, or on the job. What do you all think? So I got a number of very interesting responses, and I thought I'd go through some of them with you and talk to you about why I think that while a PhD is not necessarily an indication of either trustworthiness or authority on any particular topic, often it can be a good indication of whether or not you, as a viewer, should listen to what you're being told, or if you should take a step back and think, I need to do some research on this. So I'm going to go through some of the tweets and then probably talk a little bit more about some specific examples. And before I do that, we have a super chat from Brant. Thank you, Brant. He says he's at work, just popping in to say hi. Hello. Nice to see you. If you have questions, please tag me in the side chat and I will do my best to get to them. I can see the side chat, so go for it. Because I'm quite focused, I might not answer everything, but if it's pressing, ask me and I will do my best. So that was my original tweet. I had a selection of responses. I've tried to group them so that the things that almost saying the same thing are together, so we don't cover the same ground twice. So one person said, so here's the thing, in academia I agree 100%, but in industry life is not straightforward. I studied electronics and did programming, and now I'm a lead embedded programmer on the project I'm working on, and I'm consulted as an expert for the device purely on experience. And another person said, I used to be very well versed in clinical psychology and psychiatry, but I worked in a psych ward. I was a nursing assistant, but was frequently called to consult with doctors because they valued my insight. I wasn't an expert, but I was very cogent in those areas. I think, and someone else responded to that saying, I think that's an excellent example of how experience can supplement letters after your name. I know folks who've been working in the field for 30 plus years and only have a BA, but they're invaluable to a project based on experience alone. And I think that's a really, really valid comment. Just because you have a lot of schooling doesn't necessarily mean you know, practically speaking, what you're talking about. Like I've had archaeological experience. I've had archaeology classes, a lot of archaeology classes, but that doesn't make me a good archaeologist or even a passing, like I'm not an archaeologist. You should never ever ask me anything archaeological. If you do, I'll do my best to research it thoroughly, but I'm going to answer with the caveat of, I'm not an archaeologist. You should find an archaeologist to ask. And I think this kind of thing is very, very true and important in things like more practical fields maybe than Assyriology and biblical studies and the study of history. Because with things like psychiatry, when you're getting on-the-job experience all day, every day, like 30 years of experience is a lot. Like, I'm sure that this person knows a hell of a lot more about psychiatry and psychology than maybe a lot of actual doctors, purely because they've had that much experience. And the same is true for field archaeologists and probably for people who study cuneiform kind of on their own. If you read cuneiform every single day for like 10 years, you're going to be really good at it. You obviously have to have the foundation there first, so you know what skills you're building on and what skills you're developing. But that's a fantastic way, and I would definitely call these people experts. I would be absolutely thrilled if Ancient Aliens had an archaeologist on talking about this stuff who had 10, 20, 30 years of experience and no PhD. That is an opinion I would take seriously, providing, of course, that it was good I'm trying to choose my words carefully. It was a good, solid archaeological dig sites that weren't doing things like going around and proving the Bible right, because people working at those kinds of sites often find what they're looking for. And we'll get back to that a little bit later on. But generally speaking, like, someone who's been working in archaeological sites for 30 years knows a hell of a lot more about archaeology than I do, and probably a lot more about archaeology than some archaeology grad students. Definitely experts, definitely should take their opinions seriously. So, having said that, let's move on to the next one. The next set. So these all, again, kind of fall within the same remit. I think the value of professional research is more the systematic approach they take. This keeps them more grounded, where an amateur can be deflected into left field much more easily, so to speak. See, this is actually a very, very good point. If you have a high-level academic degree, and again, I'm specifically talking about academia. I'm not talking about practical skills like sewing or mechanics or things that you can learn really, really well by, like, physically doing them. I'm a pretty decent seamstress and I've had absolutely no formal training in it whatsoever. Things like academia, there are lots of pitfalls you can fall into. And because people often don't write about them and point them out in helpful, easy to find places for lay scholars, it's actually quite difficult to work out sometimes whether what you're reading is credible, is up to date, and if it's written by someone who should be taken seriously. For example, let me think. So a lot of early scholarship on Mesopotamian love literature discusses it in terms of like the sacred marriage ritual, which is actually a highly contested thing. Previously, when this stuff was discussed, it was assumed that all love literature referred to the sacred marriage. It was rock solid evidence for an actual sacred marriage. For those who don't know, the sacred marriage ritual is where the king has sex with the high priestess to kind of ensure the fertility of the land, possibly to produce an heir to the throne. I'm not 100% sure on that. Please don't quote me on it. And we have some evidence for it. We don't have an awful lot, but we have some. And because we have some, early scholars took this love literature as being more evidence. And because scholarship has done what it does and has moved on and new things have been discovered, different theories have been disproven or adapted or modified, looking at this collection of texts in that lens is no longer considered a reasonable thing to do. They're understood as being much more complex, much more interesting than just this one-dimensional, oh, it's the sacred marriage interpretation. And if I hadn't gone through grad school, if I hadn't had a professor point this kind of stuff out to me and teach me not only how to think critically, but where to go to check sources, like, I wouldn't know that at all. Because no one points it out. No one writes it down for people outside of academic journals, which are very expensive and very difficult to gain access to if you're not a student or a professor or have a couple of $100s a year to spend on academic journals. I'm going to take a brief break here because we have another super chat. Rayano Gray, I always learn something from your videos. Thank you. You're very welcome. I'm glad that people learn things. And this is the thing. All my Ancient Aliens video was intended to do was to point things out for other people, so that when they go through this kind of TV show, they can think to themselves, is this credible, is this realistic, or is this a misrepresentation of the sources? So the second tweet here. In an academic or scientific field, an expert should have published in peer-reviewed journals. In other fields, perhaps experience has more weight. And then the third comment says something very similar. I think an expert in an academic field should have an advanced degree. Multiple peer-reviewed papers on the topic would suffice in lieu of said degree. Another excellent point. If you don't have experience, or even, if you don't have a PhD but lots of experience, or even if you have a PhD, but it's maybe not from a terribly credible university, which is very possible. Again, we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Peer review is a fantastic way to test your research. And if any of these ancient alien theorists have actually published their findings, their theories in credible peer-reviewed resources, and had some pushback, or had actual scholars read their stuff and say, you know what, there's something to this, then yes, I would be much more willing to accept them as experts in the fields that they're talking on. They haven't, because what these people tend to do is write popular books that are subject to precisely zero scrutiny, and then claim everything they've essentially made up as fact. If you're going to present yourself as an expert, or if a TV show is going to present you as an expert, I think something like peer-reviewed work is crucially important, because it shows people that you are willing to have your ideas and your hypotheses scrutinized by people who know mostly more than you do. Because the way peer review works is you send a journal article into a journal, they find experts in the field that you've written in to review it, and you get sent the comments. And it's incredibly important for academic research, because that's how we make sure we're not all going crazy. If I had this really spectacular idea, even though I have a even though I will eventually have a PhD, if I have this spectacular idea and I send it in to a peer-reviewed journal and my evidence just isn't there, and it doesn't stand up to scrutiny, and I get sent really damning comments and they don't publish me, I think, well, I need to go back to the drawing board, because clearly this argument is not as watertight as I think it is. I suspect that's happened to some people, and their response has been, oh, well, everyone who reviewed my article is just stupid, or they don't want to upset the status quo, or they don't want to lose their jobs, or you hear these arguments all the time. The only reason that my fringe theory on unicorns on the moon wasn't published is because the people who were going to publish it are just too scared of the truth. I would hazard that that's almost never the case. If your work is not being published, if your work is not being taken seriously, it's because you're not doing it properly, or the conclusions you are drawing from the evidence you have are not tenable. So we've looked at experience as a substitute for formal education. Definitely very valid, especially if that experience is like long-term professional experience. Again, a professional, even someone who works in archaeological fields during the summer is going to know far more than I do about archaeology, about the practice of archaeology, probably about the interpretation of archaeological findings. And peer review as a very important way to determine whether your own ideas are valid, but also for viewers and for people reading your work to determine whether other people in your field think that your ideas are valid. It can be quite difficult sometimes as a layperson or a non-expert to work out if what you're reading is sane. I've already said this today. I'll probably say it several more times. Like, I'm not a classicist. I love the classics, but I'm not a classicist. And sometimes if I'm reading something, it's difficult to determine if this is a fringe theory, if this is really old scholarship, or if it's current and up to date and, accurate. And peer review is a really, really good way to do that, because if something gets past peer review in a reputable journal, then it's probably going to be all right and reasonable to take it as good scholarship. So we did get a negative comment, which I feel is important to address. The objection that you must be an expert to criticize a person or company or field is an attempt to shut you up and nothing more. Any critique with substance would be on the ideas you presented rather than on your credentials. And it's a reasonable statement. I agree with that. If you are simply critiquing or shutting someone up because they don't have a PhD, you're doing it wrong. And I don't think I did that in the Ancient Aliens video. It's very possible that I do. I hope I don't. My point more was that if you're making these really fringe claims with no training, with no experience, with no education in the field you're making these claims in, you probably shouldn't be making them. And I wanted to make it clear to people watching that if you are listening to someone making fringe claims, that them having a PhD is a good way to gauge whether or not you should be listening to them. It's not always, and we will get to that in 1 second, because there is one more comment that I wanted to share. So as I understood, it's not about degrees or laypersons versus experts, but a theory solely presented by a non-expert, which isn't bad per se, since an outside view can help raising questions, but without asking for expert context, kind of bias the show usually accuses scientists of. So this is just reiterating what I was saying earlier. Whether or not you have a degree oftentimes is not really the problem. It's whether you are presenting a theory that has no traction no traction within the scholarly community as a fact. And this is what the people on Ancient Aliens are doing. They're taking fringe theories, ideas with very little evidence, and ideas that wouldn't even be considered by serious scholars, and they're presenting it as fact. They don't have the credentials to do that. They don't have the experience to do that. And they sure as hell haven't published anything in a peer-reviewed journal that's been scrutinized by people who are actually experts in the field. So that is my Twitter experience. There were a few other things that I wanted to address as well, and then I'll see how the chat's doing. If you have any questions, remember, tag me in them, and I will try and get to them. So I did briefly touch on this earlier, but we're going to go into a bit more detail on it. Just because someone has a PhD does not make them a credible source. I gave the example of Josh not being a chemist. If you hear Josh talking about chemistry and presenting it as fact, you need to ask him for his sources, because he has no right to be doing that. As he's not a chemist, he has no chemistry training at all. He's not going to do that, but it's a good example. You also see this in the Answers in Genesis crew. And thank you, Paul Agia. We did a recording with him yesterday, which was fascinating because I've not really watched a lot of Answers in Genesis, and I didn't realize how many PhDs they have on staff. Which is fascinating and quite worrying to me, because what a PhD does, as you've experienced through this live stream, is it often lends credibility to people because they have the word doctor before their name. The problem is that everyone has biases. People don't always stick to their fields when they're giving their opinions as experts or otherwise. And it can be quite difficult sometimes, unless someone tells you, to work out who's telling you factual information and who is omitting things or twisting things or bending things to fit their narrative of the world. So we were watching part of Answers in Genesis, and one of the presenters was a woman who's, Paul says, has a doctorate in genetics, which is impressive. Like, I don't know how genetics works, but she was speaking about ancient history and presenting her opinions as fact. And because she's a doctor and has an education, I suspect that there are probably a few people who were taking her more seriously than they maybe would have done if she was not a doctor. And apparently the Answers in Genesis group also has a journal, which is why I was saying a credible peer-reviewed journal. Because if the Answers in Genesis group have a journal and they do some form of peer review, which seems to be just asking people that you like to read your work for you before it's published, which is not what peer review is, then it gives the illusion of authority and of expertise where there probably shouldn't be. If you're a doctor in genetics, you should not be talking about the Hebrew. You should not be talking about ancient history or archaeology as anything more than an interested non-expert. If you are on a TV show as a presenter and speaking as if you were some kind of expert in these fields, that's incredibly dishonest. And is why you won't really catch Josh and I talking about things outside our field without prefacing it with, well, I'm not a chemist, or, well, I don't speak Greek, because what we're giving following those statements is opinion. It might be a somewhat informed opinion, but a lot of the time it's not. And we don't want to mislead people into thinking that we have more authority and more expertise than we actually do. And likewise, if you publish or you see something published in a journal, it can be quite difficult to work out if that journal is actually reputable or not. The Answers in Genesis journal is not. They have an agenda, they have a very clear agenda, and everything they publish is going to be following that agenda. So of course, if you go to that journal, you're going to find evidence for the historicity of the Bible, and evidence for the creation of the earth, and evidence for the historicity of Adam and Eve and stuff like that. That really doesn't make it credible. Yes, I hope that made sense. I feel like I was a little bit all over the place there. If you have questions, put them in the side chat. And let me have a go at them. Rayano Gray, is there an inexpensive journal you would recommend? So because I'm a student, I actually don't pay for any of my journals. I get them through my library. So I honestly don't know current prices because it's been a long time since I looked at them. I would recommend looking at a website called jstor.org, jstor.org. Because a membership to that will get you access to several hundred different journals in different fields. If there are specific articles that you found elsewhere that you're interested in, you might be able to get your local, like a membership to your local university library, and get a copy of the article through them. But actual membership to specific journals I really can't advise on. If you're interested in the ancient world and the stuff Josh and I do, then BASOR, the Bulletin of the Oriental Research, Bulletin of the American Oriental Research, is a good one. Also, there's like Journal of Cuneiform Studies. But no, I'm sorry, I can't think of anything like specific that I can give you prices on. Trevor Lunn, claims of being an expert in academia are more credible when the claimant can and does also tell you how their opinions are subject to objections and falsification. And this is something that I pointed out on the Ancient Aliens video. The archaeologists that they had talking for the majority of the introduction, like, he admitted ignorance at several points. He said, we don't know, we can't tell. Whereas the Ancient Aliens experts quite often said, it's definitely this, or I know it's definitely this, or like ancient alien theorists have an opinion, or they know what's going on. But they didn't really say things like, we don't know, we can't tell. So yeah, that's an excellent point. If you are talking or you're hearing an expert who has to be right all the time, you might want to think about maybe you should look into their credentials. And actually, that's another thing that we can talk briefly about. Something that grad school taught me that I didn't even think about prior. I do a Google search. If you have found a paper written by someone, Dr. So-and-so, Google it. Find out where they are, who they are, where they work. Oftentimes you can find where they got their PhD from. And then, if necessary, you can do a bit of research into the school they went to. And Josh has had this happen to him. Someone Googled him and looked at Liberty University, which is where he got his master's, and said, on the basis of that, I'm not going to listen to anything this person says, because Liberty University is not a good school. And they're right, it's not now. It used to have a very rigorous linguistics program, which is what Josh went through. And I mean, Josh's degree was good enough for Johns Hopkins, so I'm pretty confident in saying that Josh knows what he's talking about. But that's an excellent thing to do. If you hear someone talking, you don't know whether they have any like actual credible reason to be talking about what they're talking about, just Google them. If they're employed by a good school, they're slightly more likely to be reputable. That doesn't always hold true. So again, you have to be critical when you read this stuff and when you watch these shows and listen to interviews like the ones we do. Be critical. Use your use your own brain and work out, does this sound reasonable? Does this sound like this person has an axe to grind? Do they sound like they have some kind of training in the field that they're talking about? Yeah, so that's kind of all I had to say. I hope this has been somewhat useful. I'm going to just take a quick scroll through the comments and see if we have anything that needs reading out. If you do, then if you do have any questions still, put them in the comments, tag me in them. I'll try and get to them. I say try and get to them, I'll definitely get to them, because we're not terribly busy right now. Compelled unbeliever. How often does an expert become hyper-focused and thus be unable to see the big picture? So sometimes you will see, and it happened to me, it's currently happening to me. It's pretty normal, actually, for PhD students and then for doctors, once they graduate, to focus in on a very small area of research, because you have to. There is so much that you can research and investigate that it would take several lifetimes to get a good grasp of any of it. Most people do try, especially if they're teaching, and keep like a broad understanding of the field as a whole, and read outside their own particular specialism and go to conferences and talk to people who don't do what they do. But no, it does happen. I've been working on royal inscriptions for like 3-4 years now. So my brain is pretty focused on royal inscriptions. Luckily, because of the nature of my research, it's quite holistic. So I also pay attention to history, and culture of that produce those inscriptions. But it's still a focus. And Josh's focus when he was writing his dissertation was on a very obscure form of Sumerian. So you do get very laser-minded, and it can be quite difficult to break out of it. However, I would still say that it's relatively rare for people to like completely lose focus of the field as a whole. Especially now you have things like email listservs. I get like 12 emails minimum a day from the Assyriological like professional email listings that have book publications and lectures and newspaper articles that are in my field. They're not directly related to what I do. So it's still relatively easy to keep an eye on what's going on, and to find things that are interesting that you don't work on every single day, and read things that I wouldn't ever think to research. Like, I'm not a biblicist. It doesn't interest me that much. But if something comes through on, like, someone recently rewrote the whole Bible, I was like, oh, that looks kind of interesting, I should read it. It doesn't make me an expert, but it does make sure that I stay connected with the rest of the field and stay grounded in some level of reality that doesn't depend on royal inscriptions. So, do we have any more questions? Christina Blackfeather says that her mum stopped watching Ancient Aliens because it's got too weird for her. That's good news. That's good news. I think they've been going for, 12 years now? They've got to be scraping the barrel of what they can find even vaguely credible. Anyway. I didn't realise. Apparently Dr. Kent Hovind has a mail-order PhD and his dissertation includes a poem in the middle of it. Interest, and his dissertation starts, "Hello, my name is Kent Hovind." Wow. That's very interesting and not what I would normally think of as a dissertation. Very strange. So Sydney V, my daughter's friend received a refund when the school her online degree was from was discredited, but she'd been working in the field for almost 2 years. The school was fake, her education wasn't. Exactly. Exactly. And that goes along with what I was trying very incoherently to say earlier, that really education isn't everything. It can be a very good indicator. It can help you learn how to think critically and help you navigate the quite strange and abstruse waters of academic scholarship, but experience and actual on-the-job training is absolutely invaluable. So yeah, I didn't have anything else to say. That was kind of all I was going for. Hovine's Dissertation is freely available online and is genuinely hilarious to read. Worth a few minutes if you have some spare time. One of these days when I have spare time, I might take a look at that. Because that would be, I mean, it's good also if you're criticizing someone to actually have a handle on exactly what it is they're saying. So that would probably be a good thing for me to read. Thank you. Okay, well, if we are, I think we're about done. Again, if you have any questions, get them in quickly and I will try and answer them. But it looks like there's been quite a lively discussion that hasn't required my input, which is awesome. If you have enjoyed what you're watching, please click the like button. We have 27 likes. We have 63 people watching. Dude, thank you all for joining me. Hit the like button if you've enjoyed yourself. Excuse me. That would be awesome. We do have a couple of questions. People saying thank you. You're all welcome. Thank you very much for joining me. I'm sorry I wasn't quite on point today. The baby has been waking up multiple times a night, so I'm running on about 3 hours sleep. Christina Blackfeather. I get people who try to discredit me for being a 2-year resident RN. I think that's a resident nurse, but I have 24 years of experience. Yeah, and that's a fantastic example of experience definitely trumping education, because you have the educational basis, but you have so much experience and professional experiences, and it's like experience and professional experience to me are slightly different. It's not like you've been practicing nursing like in your back garden, but you've been part of a professional body and stuff like that. So you've actually got like really good experience, and that should be honestly more than enough for everyone. And sometimes you might want someone who has experience, more experience than in education. And actually nursing and medical doctors are two things that I can think of that I might prefer longer experience over a higher qualification. Maybe if you've got like 50 years nursing experience and a brand new nurse who's got a slightly higher degree than you have, I probably want the more experienced nurse looking after me. So education is definitely not everything. Most definitely. Scrappy, can you go over what criteria for objectioning or questioning experts again? Well, I mean, that's what the whole stream has been. If I can, in a nutshell, if your experts have zero experience, like any experience, if they do not have any education in the field they're talking in, if they have never published anything in a peer-reviewed journal, and I'm like discrediting myself as I speak. I have never published in a peer-reviewed journal. I have no professional experience outside of my schooling, and I don't have a PhD yet. So everything I'm saying, for God's sake, go and research. If you don't think that I have the credentials to be saying what I'm saying, go and do your own research. Ask other people. Find people that you consider to be experts. And ask them instead of me. That's totally fine and perfectly reasonable. But those for me were the big ones. No expertise, no education, and no like engagement in the wider scholarly field. So nothing in a peer-reviewed journal. No papers at academic conferences. Okay, so thank you all very much. I'm probably going to wrap up now. Although before I stop, we will be running a fundraiser relatively soon. I was going through the finances a couple of days ago on our scholarship program. For those who don't know, we run a scholarship program. We give, this is the first year we're doing it, so we will be giving $2,000 in summer funding to a PhD student. Our patrons get to choose which students they wish to fund, but the call for applications will be going out relatively soon. And I went through the finances last night. We're like $700 off being able to fund 2 students, which is really, I can't, and I've got the see-through teeth again. Scrappy, no, I'm not saying you can't question me because you're not an expert. I'm saying question everything. Use your own judgment to decide whether you should be listening to the person who's giving you advice or knowledge or whatever. You don't like me, I have no idea why. If you don't like me, for the love of God, go and find someone else to bother. So anyway, we're so close to being able to fund 2 PhD students over the summer. So because of that, we are going to have a fundraising drive to try and just cover that extra $700, so we can fund 2 students. So keep your eyes open for that. I'll be putting information out maybe this weekend. It depends on how busy I am. Christina Blackfeather, yes, send me an email. That would be a painting stream for the fundraiser would be absolutely perfect. Thank you. So yes, keep your eyes on that. Trevor Lund, don't forget to thank Giorgio A. Tsoukalos for the 1 dislike on this stream. I doubt we actually figure terribly largely in his radar. He's too busy worrying about aliens. Anyway, thank you all very much for joining me. I don't think we have an interview this week. We have one next week, which might be interesting because I'm going to be in the UK and my parents' internet is problematic, but I'm going to try it, and if we have to reschedule, then we will reschedule. What else is happening this weekend? This weekend we have a patron hangout on Sunday, but we should also do a book club. If you've not joined us for our book clubs before, they are quite amusing. We're still going through Gilgamesh. I think we have one more tablet of Gilgamesh to read through. We read Mesopotamian literature, we stop and we provide commentary if it's appropriate. Sometimes there are silly voices. I often say the word penis. We have a lot of fun. So that will probably be on a Saturday, but I will I'll put it on the calendar. If you want to look at when we are live streaming, if you go to digitalhammurabi.com/calendar, then you will be able to see all of the interviews, all of the planned live streams. That would be great. I think that was everything. Hooray! We did it. And I'm only like a little bit see-through. Woo! So thank you again, everybody, for joining me. This has been lots of fun, and I will see you next Wednesday. I don't know what I'm going to talk about. Maybe it'll be exciting. Who knows? Remember, until next time, resist poor scholarship. Always ask, how do you know that? Bye, guys.